والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. My big sister, Honorable Aisha Duku, former Honorable Minister of Education and now a member of the Federal House of Representatives, who of course is very passionate about Al-Majri, other members of the National Assembly here present, my other sister, but not big sister because we were in the same class, Hajia Mariam Owais, the special advisor to the President on social investment, the representatives of His Excellency, the Governor of Borno State, and the representative of the Honorable Minister for Humanitarian Affairs, our big brother, Dr. Usman Bugaji, who has been the one driving this effort to hold a national summit together with our big sister, Hajia Rabi Hussein Adamu, other distinguished participants here present. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I have noted that the presentation by my brother Al-Haji Mustafa bin Tube is much better than mine, even though I'm supposed to be an IT professional. So it appears I have to learn both how to get funding for myself and funding for this project, as well as learn how to make good PowerPoint presentations. I have also noted that the arrangements for this workshop, which is a workshop by the funding cohort and the legislative cohort, the arrangements are much better than our own workshops, which took place over the last several weeks in Kaduna. So we may need to learn a little bit from them also. Nevertheless, I think our cohort, the models cohort, is still the most important cohort of the 5 cohorts mentioned by Dr. Usman Bugaji. And I guess this is why I have been asked to make this presentation. The work of the other cohorts depends on our work, which I'm about to present. Next slide. These are the contents of my presentation. Next slide. Our cohort has the responsibility of proposing practical and sustainable models that will address the educational needs of the teeming population of Muslim children in Nigeria now and in the future. And it is these proposed models that the other 4 cohort groups would use. Now, what are the general requirements of the system of education that we are looking for? Obviously, next slide. As far as learning outcomes are concerned, We want all our children to be well grounded in basic Islamic studies in general and in the sciences of the Quran, as well as all the skills and knowledge that they require to be responsible citizens in our 21st century and beyond. Next slide. We obviously want them to be very proficient both in English and in Arabic. And they must also have the basic knowledge in mathematics, social studies, and the other relevant subjects. As far as a career path is concerned, we want our graduates to be able to join any life pursuit of their choice, whether it is academic, craft, trade, without prejudice to the system of education they graduate from. Next slide. In terms of teaching and learning facilities, we want all the schools to have adequate facilities and a conducive teaching and learning environment. We want our teachers to be very qualified. We want them to be adequately compensated. And we want the system to be effectively monitored to ensure that schools maintain minimum standards. Next slide. With respect to welfare requirements, we want some minimum standards to be guaranteed. If the schools are boarding, we want the students to be properly accommodated, to have proper wash facilities, water, sanitation, and health, and of course, we want their feeding to be guaranteed. Next slide. Unfortunately, virtually all of these requirements are currently out of reach of our Al-Majri. Surprisingly enough, in many countries which have largely similar characteristics as ours, they have been able to change their systems and to address all these problems. I'm going to go through a few countries, and I'll try to be as quick as possible because there are so many lessons to learn from other similar countries than ours. In fact, many of them are much less endowed than our own country. The Bengali experience is very interesting. They have a very strong policy on madrasa education. They have strong legislation to support that. And because of that, when you go, you see that the children are in very suitable learning environments. You see solid next slide. Next slide. You see very solid infrastructure that even our universities don't have. And remember, I'm talking of Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world. In terms of welfare, every student seems to be well fed and happy. Next slide. Next slide. There are also quite a number of female madrasas. And I'm happy Hajia Aisha mentioned this. and also Hajia Maryam, while we may be very worried about our Al-Majri, we need to be asking about their female sisters. Most of them are not getting the type of education that they should be getting. They may not be out there begging like our Al-Majri, but they are probably out there doing talla and perhaps even much more prone to various dangers. So Bangladesh has lots of female madrasas. The teachers are all paid by the government. And this is important, next slide, there is certification. All the madrasas have equivalents in the conventional system. The government has equated different levels of the Aliyah madrasa system with corresponding levels in the general education system. I should mention here that in Bangladesh there are two types of madrasas. There are the Aliyah madrasas, and this cuts across most of Southeast Asia. The Aliyah madrasas are those that are integrated, and many of them have the support of the government. The Qawmi madrasas are the traditional madrasas that have refused to integrate, and therefore they don't have support from the government. Students from madrasa schools can transfer to general schools. Holders of certificates of madrasa education are given same conditions of service as graduates from general education. Next slide. And then funding. Government substantially funds Aliyah madrasas by paying all the teachers and so on. Next slide. Let's quickly go to other countries. In Saudi Arabia, the main lesson I want us to learn is that they have two parallel systems. Each system is recognized and each system is fully funded by the government. And each system goes all the way to the university level. Next slide. In Egypt, the lesson is that all madrasas are affiliated to Al-Azhar University, giving the opportunity for all students of the Islamic educational system to ultimately enroll in Al-Azhar University. In Sudan, there are a number of Islamic universities that admit students from Islamic schools, and there are many khalwas, the equivalent of our sangaya, and the welfare conditions of students of khalwas, of course, are substantially better than that for al-Majri. Khalwas get a lot of support from the government and also from the communities, and I understand they get a lot of support from the Zakah institution. In Indonesia, there are various levels of madrasa education, and the graduates of the madrasa system are eligible to seek admission into any of the large numbers of institutions. You'll be surprised. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Islamic universities in Indonesia. Hundreds, possibly over 1,000 Islamic universities. In Turkey, I think the main lesson to learn is that the Imam Hatib schools, they are considered as technical schools. You learn, many of them, of course, employ or rather admit scholars or students of Islamic studies, but they undergo a lot of vocational and skill-based training. And in the end, they're equivalent to technical schools. So many of the graduates transfer to polytechnics. So many of us that are worried or very concerned or passionate about skill-based training for our Sangayas, we should probably go and see the Imam Hatib model. In Gambia, they also have khalwas. They're identical to our Sangayas in terms of the curriculum. It's only the Quran. In terms of the learning and teaching methods with the Al-Luna, the difference between Gambia and Nigeria is that the Al-Majri do not beg. When you see them, you can see that their welfare conditions are not so good. They're getting support from the community, not much from the government, but they do not beg. If you just cross over to Senegal, a lot of begging, a lot of beggars, the same types of bowls that we have, and Senegal and Gambia are very similar. So I think the major lesson from Gambia is that culturally, their culture does not tolerate the begging of Al-Majri. Why is it that we as Hausas have this begging culture? There has to be a lot of advocacy. I'm happy that one of our cohorts is on advocacy. We need to do a lot of advocacy to parents, to communities, so that we stop this culture of begging. There are other examples from other countries, but the bottom line is that it is only Nigeria and a few other West African countries that we have this system of begging by students of the traditional Quranic schools. We need to stop this begging, and we need models that will help us move from wherever we are now to where we want to be. So I decided to start with the long-term solution first, and my brother has already explained that in his presentation, Alhaji Mustafa bin Tube, that we want an integrated Sangaya system at least the primary level. And after that, as much as possible, we want our children to mainstream into the normal education system. If you want to study medicine or law or whatever, go ahead and do it. If you want to specialize in Islamic studies and become an Islamic scholar, go ahead and do it. So, this is the long-term solution. The curricula should be rich enough, comprehensive enough, and as far back as the Makkah, was it 1975 or was it 6 conference, education conference, there has been this talk of education has to be all-encompassing, comprehensive. The Quranic education, the other Islamiyat, the conventional subjects. This is what our children deserve. Now, next slide. Go back, please. Now, you see, if we want this system to work, as has been explained, it has to be a day system. It has to be a predominantly day system where, as has been stated, parents take care of their children. There may be a few boarding schools here and there, but it has to be a predominantly day system. The only way that the system can be funded is if it is a predominantly day system. We have seen many states in the last several years. Many of us attended boarding schools. I know that from a young age of 7 years old, I went to boarding school. And I went to boarding school all the way to the university. But now, we know that in most states, there has been this policy of deboarding. This has to be done also for our traditional Islamic system. That's the only way it can be properly funded. Now, next slide. In this Angaya primary school model that we're thinking of, the mode of instruction for the Quranic education should be the same as the typical Sangaya. But in addition, there has to be all the Islamiyat, all the range of Islamic subjects. Also, we must have conventional subjects. So we can have the same system of teaching and learning when it comes to Quranic recitation and memorization. But for the conventional subjects, the modern methods of teaching. Next slide. I've already talked about this. Unfortunately, if we want to solve the welfare problems of Al-Majri, we need our schools to be day rather than boarding. For the few boarding schools, there must be necessary arrangements for the accommodation, feeding, healthcare, and other welfare needs of the students. This, of course, means additional financial implications. In terms of proprietorship, next slide, and administration, it is suggested that such schools should be owned and managed by communities, mosques, and organizations rather than individuals. As long as you leave the schools to Al-Rammas, they cannot fully take care of the schools. The schools need to be community-owned schools, schools owned by mosques, and Islamic organizations. The very strong Al-Ramumi can have their own schools. The other Al-Ramumi can be teachers in community schools, and they should be paid well. The government can have some of these schools, but we need more and more to tell ourselves that as Muslim individuals, as Muslim communities, as Muslim organizations, whether the government is there for us or it is not there for us, we should be able to fund this education system. The responsibility is mainly ours. If the government is there to help us, fine and good. If it is not there, we should be able to do it ourselves. From whatever angle we look at it, even if it is from the resources, we can get enough resources to get these types of schools. That's next slide. As far as funding is concerned, it's a major issue, but we should be able to do it ourselves. Next slide. There is also the need for strong legislation that will lead to this long-term solution. This would give government the authority to implement and enforce it. And I'm happy the legislative cohort is working on the legislation. Obviously, it should touch on the broad policy issues, the overall objectives, the major activities to be implemented, similar to the things that my senior brother, Professor Naia, has already mentioned. Now, much as we want to be able to get this long-term solution, we cannot get it overnight. And incidentally, in our cohort, we do not emphasize so much on the other long-term solutions, because to us, we feel that many of the existing models, and some of them are good and solid, they will stay for a very long time. Not the 5 years that Alhaji Mustafa bin Tube is talking about. What we want is that majority of our children should go to these integrated schools. Let's say 80-85%. If the remaining 15 to 20% remain in some of the other models, it's okay. We do not expect a situation whereby all our children will automatically, either in the short or in the long term, get into this integrated model that we're talking about. So, for example, the skill-based Sangaya, and this is what I'm about to go into, it's good if it remains for quite a long time. Some of the other short-term options, it's good. But I should mention that when we say there's an integrated Sangaya model, it also automatically includes the skill-based. Because if you are in a normal conventional system of education and you go to primary, secondary school, some of them get to the universities, others get to polytechnics and colleges of education, and polytechnics are where there's a lot of vocational and skill-based training, and some others from there begin to get more training in several skills and so on. So automatically, that system encompasses everything. We don't want a situation where from the beginning you are already narrowing the chances of a student to either become a plumber or a carpenter or a tailor. At first, his opportunities or her opportunities should be as wide as possible. Later on, if he or she does not do well with higher education and so on, then they can go into any vocational skills. So these short-term options are about 5, and I'll do it very quickly. The first, what we call them, short-term options from where we are now, and we want to go to that integrated model. We want to be able to improve the current models while we are gradually moving to where we want to go. And the first one is whatever type of sangaya that exists today, there should be a model that allows the students to go to basic education in nearby schools. This is already taking place, but you'll see that only a very small number of Almajiris who are in Sangayas are able to go to conventional schools. Very, very, almost non-existent, but a few of them exist. This fully integrated Sangaya model is the same as the long-term solution that we are looking for. The conventional Sangaya model, the small adjustment that needs to be done in a typical Sangaya is to be able to have at least some basic education, numeracy and literacy. BESDA that Hajia Mariam mentioned is trying to do exactly this. And in many Sangayas, it is taking place now, a little bit of basic education plus the Quranic education that the Sangaya is already offering. At least this basic education component helps the Almajiris to be better citizens. They have their Quranic education, and with basic education, they can do more in society. They can maybe go after some skills and so on. Even use the phone. I think this is what Hajia Aisha is trying to say. Yes. Now then there's the skill-based Sangaya. And the skill-based Sangaya is very attractive. And I remember as a special advisor to the governor on Sangaya education, I found it extremely attractive to both the Alarammas and the students. Anything else, we had quite a bit of trouble convincing the Alarammas. But for you to go to an Alarama and say, Alarama, I want you, give your students, we'll teach them carpentry, tailoring, whatever, they will gladly accept. So this is already very much of an accepted model. So in addition to the Quranic education, the Islamiyat should also be there, a little bit of basic education, and there should be a lot of skill-based training, so that obviously for the young, or rather the, if you want, teenage Almajiris, so that they can have useful skills and be able to lead fairly decent lives. So this is a very good model. Now, a number of states, in particular Kano, has come up with this CQS, College of Quranic Studies. What happens is that students from the typical Sangaya, who may not have had any basic education, only Quranic education, they come to this 4-year program, which is the equivalent of secondary education, and they get very intensive training on basic education, on, in particular, being able to recite the Quran with proper tajweed rules and to memorize the Quran, and a few Islamiyat. We have many of our scholars today that went through this system, and after the College of Quranic Studies, which is equivalent to secondary school education, they can go and get maybe diplomas in Amin Kano College of Legal Studies and the other legal colleges we have all over the country. And from there, they can even go to the universities, either here or abroad. Together with this, there are also a number of weekend HIS, Higher Islamic Studies courses that are taking place in many local government areas. And we have lots of young Al-Rammas enrolling in such programs, and then they're able to take the Mba'is examinations, and then they're able to mainstream into the conventional system through the Islamic studies channel. This is also good. And then we also feel there is the need for some of our sangayas to be converted into advanced sangaya models, which offer advanced studies in Quranic sciences, and this allows students of the sangaya system to continue their Quranic studies in the traditional mode. It is important that the students in this model have both basic education and Islamic studies. Next slide, please. That's the Madrasa Diniya model. So you see, that's why I'm saying some of these 6 models, we expect them to stay for a long time. The typical Sangaya, which does not have any basic education component, does not have any skill-based component, we'll want to eliminate it as soon as possible. But some of the other models, this Madrasa Diniya, for example, or the skill-based Sangaya, even if they remain for a very long time, it's good for the system. So that in the end, we'll have a mix. Most of our students are in the integrated model, but a few of them perhaps are in this Madrasa Diniya, where they go through very advanced studies in Quranic recitation and memorization. So in conclusion, brothers and sisters, the plight of the large number of Al-Majri in very pathetic welfare conditions and a very limited educational curriculum is very worrisome. There is the need to come up with viable models that we can vigorously implement and practicalize so as to have a better future for Muslim children in Nigeria and beyond.